morning.
Good morning.
This is Occupational Therapy with Kim and Jen. I'm Kim.
I'm Jen. I have a different mug.
She doesn't have her cup today. Today we are talking to you about sound sensitivity or auditory sensitivity. We see that in 75% or more of our kids on the autism spectrum and our kids with sensory processing disorder. Briefly, sensory processing is how do we handle all of the incoming input from our 8 senses. And if we have a strong emotional reaction to it and it bothers us and it affects how we are able to function during the day, then we've got a problem with it. So today we're talking about the sound hypersensitivity or auditory sensitivity. And we're talking specifically about kids, and they can be sensitive to a whole lot of sounds. Things like fire alarms, sirens from police trucks, from fire trucks, from the EMS. We're talking about fireworks, hair dryers, vacuum cleaners, any high-pitched sounds, often females' voices will bother them, phones ringing, vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, babies crying. Jen, what do you have for that?
I'm also thinking about some sounds that we hear outside, like the mower or a drill, or some other ones I had written down here were those public toilets that flush randomly or automatically, or the hair dryers in a public place that are super loud. Lunchrooms can be very loud. Dogs barking can be very loud. TVs and music, the varying sounds of those can be loud to some of our kids. Even if you don't think they're loud, the kids are processing them as noxious. And if there are more than one, so if people are talking in the kitchen while the TV is on in the living room, then that's even more sounds that are competing and that can be distracting and hard for our kids to discriminate and process. I don't know if I mentioned this, but mower, the blender, so things that we use on a very regular basis. And if our kids are constantly in that fight or flight because they hear all these noises going off, it can be disturbing to their system.
And that fight or flight that Jen talks about is something that happens in the brain, and kids can't control that. And it is very uncomfortable, and they cannot control that. So some of the things that you're going to see when a child is having experience with sound sensitivity or auditory sensitivity, of course, this is the biggest one. That tells you that something is bothering their ears. Oftentimes they cry. Sometimes I notice that you'll see something subtle with some kids that all of a sudden you don't hear a sound, but you see the child go like this. And then I hear the sound. So it's a sound that they hear. I may never have heard it, but because they did that, that triggers me to let me know they're hearing sounds that I'm not hearing. And then if I really pay attention, I hear what they're hearing. Sometimes they have a meltdown. Now, a meltdown is very different from a temper tantrum, and we're going to talk about that at another point in time, but it is an emotional reaction to being very bothered by that sound. And often there's a lot of crying that goes on with that. Sometimes our kids on the autism spectrum will start stimulating. They'll start flapping their hands or spinning around in circles. That's a way of trying to self-regulate or calm themselves down. Sometimes they run out of wherever the noise is. They go to a quiet place. Hopefully there's a quiet place set up for them. If they go under their bed, that's fine. They go under a piece of furniture, that's fine. They're trying to get away from the sound. Again, they'll sometimes do stimulation activities to try and decrease that sound. They may completely shut down and not respond to you because they're using all of their energy to try and handle that sound. You find a lot of kids who have auditory hypersensitivity are very, very light sleepers because they hear everything. If you're just walking around at night, they hear that. If you flick on a light, they hear that. TV in another room, they hear that. They may have difficulty falling asleep because of all the sounds that are still going on. Anything else that you can think of, Jen?
Yeah, so sometimes what I've seen too are some of these kids make their own noise. So while they have their ears covered, they're making their own noise because that's the only noise that they want to hear or that's soothing to them. And sometimes I have kids that you have called their name repeatedly and they honestly cannot hear you, or they can't discriminate where the sound is coming from, or they've tuned all of that out because they're focused on whether it's watching TV or a video game, and they can only do one thing at a time. So it looks like they can't hear you. But so it's not a hearing problem, which is different from what we're talking about. We're talking about not a hearing loss
disorder, yeah.
or auditory. We're talking specifically about defensiveness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And a lot of times, you know, kids will cry before they enter a place that is noisy, and that's a sign to you that they know that that's going to bother them, and they don't go in. And a lot of times auditory hypersensitivity or noise sensitivity, a lot of those kids have sensitivities to other sensations as well. So they may have visual hypersensitivity. So if you go into a place like a grocery store, that's often where we see these kids change, because they've got all of this visual input coming in from the lights above them, from people walking by, from everything on the shelves, and it's noisy. So that's a double whammy for kids. So please keep in mind that often they have hypersensitivities to lots of things that will cause an emotional reaction with them. Some of the things that you can do to mitigate the effects of the sounds are, in your home, if you have rugs or carpeting, that's going to absorb some of the sounds, as will drapes, that will absorb some of the sounds. You can't get rid of all the noises in the house, but you can certainly leave the TV off. You can leave the music off. You can try and talk with a slower pace or a little bit of a lower tone when you talk to the kids. I like to have a place where they can go and relax. If they're getting overwhelmed by the sounds, have a tent in their room. Or if you don't have a tent, you can have a table and you put a blanket over it so they can go in there, put a lot of cushions in there, put a lot of pillows in there. All of those things will absorb the sounds, and it'll give your child a place to relax. Jen's going to talk about some headphones that we'll talk about in a bit. And I like to warn the children if there is a sound coming up. I warn them because they do not like spontaneous sounds. So if I'm going to turn the vacuum cleaner on, I'm going to warn them that I'm going to do that. If I'm going to turn the blender on, I'm going to warn them that I'm going to do that. You can, if you have to go into a grocery store, you can give them some calming activities, because proprioceptive input into the muscles and joints, and we have a video on that one as well. Those activities are very calming. So you can have a little sensory kit, and in that kit you can have fidget toys that they have to squeeze. You can have chewing gum if they're old enough to chew. You can have anything that they can chew. You can have a box juice with a little coffee straw. Any kind of sucking is proprioceptive input into the jaws, and that's very calming. If they would tolerate a knit hat, that's heavy pressure into the head, that is very calming as well. Sometimes you can distract them with another form of input, because if you give them another form of input, they may not pay attention to the auditory input. So if you can give them your cell phone maybe, or a little Game Boy when they're in the grocery store, if their visual system is engaged and they're watching something, they may not pay attention to the sounds. Jen, what other ideas do you have with mitigating the sounds?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, something that Kim said earlier triggered my thought about that fight or flight thing. Sometimes our kids, if you say that you're going to the grocery store, for instance, they will automatically get that pit in the stomach and they will start showing us the responses. So they might breathe heavier, they might start sweating, or they might already start crying before you ever get there, or you're trying to get them out of the car seat or into the car seat to get to the store because they're anticipating it. So just know that those signs might be related to this.
Yes.
But I mean, I can share the screen in terms of the headphones. So if we are going to the grocery store, we might want to give them headphones to put on their head, something like this, so that would cut down some of the noise. And some of these have music in them. Here's another sound canceling headphones. I've seen babies with these at restaurants, very young children at restaurants, just to help them process the information. So those are some ideas that you can use for kids that are going to situations that have a lot of sensory input.
And one of the things that we've talked about before is that we can handle sensory overload a little bit better if we're well rested, we're feeling good, and we've eaten. So keep in mind, if your child did not sleep well or they're sick at all, they're not going to handle noise sensitivity as well as they would otherwise. And so that may impact your decision to take them to the grocery store or take them somewhere where there's a lot of activity. You might want to wait and do it when somebody else is home with the child, or a time when they're feeling a little bit better. And Jen, you wanted to talk about ways to maybe desensitize them to noises.
Yeah, so there are times that you have to go to the grocery store. You are out of milk, or you are out of formula, or you are out of diapers. You have to go to the grocery store and you have no choice but to go with your child. You have to do it. Or you have to run the vacuum. Or maybe you're the person that makes a blended drink for yourself or for your child every day, so it has to happen. So I'm about desensitizing. I think that we can't always determine, granted fireworks, maybe we can, but we can't always determine what noise kids are going to hear, or when toys are going to get dumped while they're at preschool and it's going to be this loud, obnoxious toy, or maybe a glass is going to drop or fall and shatter. We can't always determine when that's going to happen. So I want to help desensitize. So some of the ways I help my families, let's use a vacuum because that is a very common one for me. So I will have the family take a picture of the vacuum cleaner, and then I will have the family take a video of themselves vacuuming, or somebody else can take the video for them while the child is out of the house, and desensitize them that way. First, they can look at the picture, and then they can watch the video maybe for a second, and then 2 seconds, and then a minute, and then 2 minutes. And then maybe you could pull out the real vacuum. And then maybe you can get another family member or a friend to go up in their room and do something that they really like play a game or read a book while you're vacuuming downstairs. And then just closing that gap so that they can be desensitized to whatever trigger it is. So let's say they have 10 triggers. You're going to do it systematically, one by one, the one you do the most, and then work your way down the line. Now, it is important to know that sometimes it's helpful that the sounds are similar. So like a vacuum cleaner and a blender are kind of similar. So maybe the blender desensitization will go a whole lot faster. But when you come along a drill, which is kind of a high pitched sound, you might have to start at ground zero. So take your time and make sure that you're trying to get all of the sounds that they could possibly hear. So here's another idea for a game. Oh, hang on, not so fast. Right here. So this is called Animal Soundtracks, and it comes with a little disc. So it's kind of like a bingo game. And these are animal sounds. And they have different ones. So here is one that has more common sounds. So there's the fireworks, there's a sound of the ocean, somebody snoring, a car, a basketball bouncing, all of those things that could be disturbing to our kids. The other thing that I want you to do is to have your child play with toys that make sounds. So a wooden spoons on pots and pans. They make a lot of sounds. We can muffle those sounds at first and then gradually take the muffling away. Or maybe we want to get them a piano and they're not going to like it at first, but we're going to just tap the piano until they can get used to it and increase the number of sounds as opposed to avoiding sounds that they hear. Any other tips, Kim?
Yeah, I have a couple ideas. I've used YouTube a whole lot for desensitization. So if a child is afraid of a vacuum cleaner, then we'll bring it up on YouTube. So kind of when Jen was talking about the pictures, use the vision. They can see it, they hear it, they see it doesn't harm them, and they can turn it off. If they've had enough of it, they can turn it off. So I've done that with vacuum cleaners and hair dryers. And maybe for some of the older kids, or after you've done some of these desensitization practices, have them turn on the blender themselves, or have them turn on the hair dryer and turn it off. Give them control of that sound, and that might be of assistance as well.
Yeah. So cooking is a great activity for kids for lots of reasons. And you can make pancakes with or without a handheld mixer. But as they get better, let's use the handheld mixer so that we can practice some of those skills that we've now taught them. So video modeling is a great technique for these kids. And that's what Kim was talking about with the YouTube, and that was what I was talking about with the home video. So it's important, I think, especially for kids, to see that the parents or a friend or somebody they know is using this piece of equipment and they're fine. So if you get to the point that they can be in the same room with the vacuum cleaner, maybe somebody, maybe a friend or mom or dad or a sister, a brother, can hold them while they're vacuuming. Or sometimes I've taken stuffed animals and put them on the Roomba or helped them vacuum with me, so that they can see that their stuffed animal, who is very safe to them, is doing this and they're not harmed. So use what you have and what the child likes to your advantage.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to say, I briefly touched on having a sensory kit with you when you go out in public, whether you're going to a restaurant, you're going to a grocery store, because that's a big concern for a lot of my families. It's hard for them to go out in the community because these kids might be overwhelmed by sounds and sights. And we talked about having a sensory kit so that the proprioceptive input, that calming input, um, helps relax them a little bit. And I feel like I brushed over it. I wanted to talk about some other things that we can put in that input. We talked about having some squishy balls. You can have some therapy putty in there, anything where they have to suck through a straw. You can have something visual, a little Game Boy or something on an iPhone where they can watch something that's relaxing to them. Coloring is a proprioceptive activity. So if you're in a restaurant and you have them color, that's a very calming activity as well. If you have a vibrating pen when they're able to color, that gives additional input up the arm, which is also very relaxing. Any kind of building toys, if you're in a restaurant, you can bring some of the little Legos. They have to pull apart, they have to snap together. Those are very relaxing as well. Any other ideas for a sensory kit, Jen?
No, but I just had a thought, which I hear from my parents a lot, is that while they're at the grocery store and their kid is looking at their iPhone or something, and they feel like parents are judging them, don't worry about that. Who cares? Nobody's in your shoes. You need to go through the grocery store. Nobody knows your kid like you do. Do what you need to do, because you need to get this done, and you're helping them. Keeping them at home and never exposing them to different sounds and experiences is not helping them. So trust yourself is what I was thinking.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, a lot of times families will say that people say things to them. I had a mom once who had two children on the autism spectrum, and she got tired of people looking at her and making comments. So she found T-shirts that she put on her children that said, "Autism is my superpower. What is yours?" And she said that really decreased the comments that she received
Yeah,
from
that's
others.
funny.
But we hope you like what you heard today. If you do, please like and subscribe and write some comments, and we'd be happy to respond back to you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
come back. We have lots more videos.
Thanks for listening.